Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, a year in the life of a polar bear, presented by Annie Van Dinther. Annie is Nat Hab's Guide Development Director and has been leading trips for us since 1999. It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Annie. I'm going to hand things off to you.
Hi, Kendall. Thank you so much for helping me set this up today. And hello, everybody. I have missed you greatly. It has been a while since I've been able to be here with you all for the webinar. I appreciate your patience this morning. We had a few technical difficulties, but I am here and very excited to be back with you. So today we are going to talk about a place that is near and dear to my heart. When Kendall asked me if I could present today, I knew right away what I needed to talk about, and that was Churchill. And that's because I feel like a migratory species that has forgotten to migrate. This is a photo that was taken in 1999, very long time ago, from the place that I met my husband, the White Whale Lodge. And this is my husband and I, way back when we were really young, before we were even married. I think our guests knew something we didn't, that we were going to get married. I've been migrating to that place for so long. Churchill is on the shores of the Hudson Bay. And us guides, we go there every year for this fall season, and we feel like migratory species. I've been returning to the shores of Hudson Bay for over 20 years now, and this year we didn't get to go. And I'm sure, like many of you who thought you were going to be there or who have been there in other years, it's a place that just feels so incredibly special. It gets under your skin. In fact, my daughter asked me recently, Mom, if you would ever get a tattoo, what would it say? And I don't know that I would get one, but if it would say the land. And that's because if you go to Churchill, when they speak about the land, it's as if the L has a capital L, the land, it's sacred. They talk about it in a different way, and that place has become an incredibly special place to me. Now, the polar bears, they migrate as well. So here's a map. Let's get oriented to this very special place. Hudson Bay, of course, very central to Canada. And Churchill, as you can see, it's on a cape that is midway through Hudson Bay. It's about 1,000 miles north of Winnipeg. I grew up in Michigan, so if you want to find out where those Great Lakes are, that's a really good way to orient yourself. My husband canoed from the Minnesota area, from those boundary waters, up to Hudson Bay when he was just 19 years old. So lots of ways of getting there. But if you were to travel with us when this whole thing is over with, we would fly from Winnipeg up to Churchill in our charter plane. That would take about 2.5 hours. But if you were a polar bear, you would be just waiting on the shores of Hudson Bay for that ice to come in. Now, we would take this charter plane and we would be ending up in this small little airport in Churchill, and we would end up in the town that I love so dearly. The town of Churchill is just about 800 people. It's not a big town. There are many different groups of First Nation people there, Inuit, Cree, and Dene, and Métis, and then there are some other various groups as well. Of those people, everybody is somehow connected to the polar bear. You can see the port here that is behind this sign, and the port is one of the biggest reasons that this town came to be. Now, I heard a scientist recently say, if you were going to build this town today, you would never build it here. And that's because it is smack dab in the middle of the polar bear migration path. It's not a logical place to build a town. My daughter had an assignment just a few weeks ago, and it was about bears. And she, of course, came to me and said, Mom, do polar bears hibernate? And I said, you know, it's confusing, honey, because we're taught that all bears hibernate, but polar bears, they like this kind of weather. For them, they don't head into a den and make a cozy place when they see this sort of weather coming. This is the weather that wakes them up. For a polar bear, these icy drifts, This means that food is right around the corner. So the bears, they're going to spend their winter months on Hudson Bay. That is the only way that they can get food. Bears rely on seals as their main food source. Now, I have to explain this very clearly. We're often taught that they only eat seals, and bears are incredibly opportunistic feeders. That means that they will eat what they can. In the Churchill Wildlife Management area, there's often goose eggs, for example. They'll eat those. There will be other kinds of eggs. They'll eat those too. But they can't rely on that kind of food. Bears are not the only animals that are on the shores of Hudson Bay. Humans are also there, and we are there hopefully to get a glimpse of the polar bears that are waiting. It's like a waiting room. It's like when you're waiting in the, well, we used to be able to wait together, right? In a restaurant lounge to get a seat at the table. The bears are waiting at the Churchill Wildlife Management Area, which is approximately 6 by 6 kilometers of trails that these rovers can go through. The bears are waiting there for that ice to form. Now, one kind of bear, polar bear, that's not there, and that is going to be a pregnant female. A pregnant female around the month of September is going to head toward the dens. She knows that she's pregnant, might not be cognitively, but on a very physical hormone level, she's aware that she needs to make her way towards those dens. So she's gonna do that. I got a chance to drive one of these rovers as we went out searching for these bears. It was pretty fun. Don't worry, they didn't let me do it for too long. Sometimes when we're searching, we get to find the prints, and this is what we might see as a female heads towards her den. It's about 75 miles inland. These dens are used over and over again, meaning the polar bears have what we call season fidelity, denning, site, season fidelity. They return year after year to the same dens. The dens actually stay quite warm inside. The females will head there in the fall while we're busy photographing the other bears. They're going to tuck inside and get ready to have those sweet cubs. And they are incredibly adorable. There's the biggest difference between the weight of the mom and the weight of the cub of any mammals. So a mom could weigh as much as 400, 500, 600 pounds even, and a brand new baby cub is gonna weigh 1 pound. Huge, huge difference. Essentially, she's gonna be giving birth to premature young, because that way she can support that young off of her fat instead of off of her muscle. And she can't lose too much muscle. She's gonna head into that den. She's going to hold up there until around the beginning of the year. Around early January, I like to call them Christmas babies just because it's easy to remember. She is going to give birth. 1, 2, maybe 3 cubs. In fact, the Churchill area, the western Hudson Bay population, used to be known for having triplets. There, she would give birth to these cubs, and she would hold on to these cubs in this den for a small period of time, about January, February, and March. Then they would start to come out of the den. Meanwhile, the other bears are going to be waiting on the shore for that ice to come in. There might not even be snow at first, and they can just smell the bay making ice. Sometimes they'll be curious and they'll come near us. And this is what I miss, the interaction with these bears. I really do feel like I forgot to do something. like I should be somewhere else. I'm constantly feeling like I should pack my bags. My husband's birthday is tomorrow, and I almost always make it home from bear season for his birthday. By now, the ice is starting to form on Hudson Bay. My friends from Churchill are posting pictures on Facebook, and I'm seeing pictures of the ice. We can start to recognize some of the bears that are around the area, usually by something like this, a scar that they might have. Some of the males, of course, will spar with each other, and then they will get a scar on their face, a broken jaw, maybe. But other than that, it's incredibly difficult to identify any of the individuals. I used to research whales. Some of you may know that humpback whales was my area. And they're easy. They have this beautiful print on the back of their flukes, and you can look at them and say, oh, there's Spot, or there's Salt, or there's Giraffe. And you know when you're out there watching them who you're watching, who they're related to, who their young one is. But this is something that remains a mystery for us for polar bears. There's research that's helping, but it's not known. So when we're watching them, we're often trying to put together a pretty mysterious picture. As it gets colder in the fall, we can start to tell that the ice is being made. There's a few different phases to the beginning of the ice. The sunsets are one of the things I miss the most. They're absolutely gorgeous. We've had some meteor showers here, and my kids have been going out ice skating, and we've had some beautiful sunsets here in Alaska, but they still just make me miss Churchill. The trees will start to be covered in this beautiful frost, and we do get those flag trees that we have in Churchill. They get covered on one side with an icy kind of substance that the wind from the Hudson Bay literally burns off the ice on one side. This is one of those gorgeous sunsets. We can start to have the light travel incredibly far. This is one of Corbin Hawkins' photos. And we've got the polar bear jail. So as these bears are waiting for the ice to form, of course, some of them are not the best at being patient and waiting, which means they wander into town. And they might even start to get into a little bit of trouble. When they do that, they will be picked up by the polar bear resource team, Manitoba Resources, and they will be brought to the polar bear jail. That is not a politically correct term. It is now called the Polar Bear Holding Facility. Back in the day, it was called the Polar Bear Jail. So I must say I still use that old-fashioned term. There are traps around town, and there are trucks that are constantly circling to make sure that everybody in town stays safe. There's 32 different cells inside the jail. They can hold adults, and they can hold moms and cubs. They don't get fed in jail, because if they did, there would be more break-ins than breakouts. They do have some ice blocks in there sometime, but really bears are not eating during this time. They are meant to be living off of their fat and waiting for that ice to come so they can go feed on seals. Once jail gets to be, holding facility gets to be around capacity, they will fly the bears out. Isn't that incredible? They'll tranquilize the bears. They will have a net, as you can see here, and they will literally fly the males to one area and the females to another. It wouldn't be safe to put them in the same area. So this tranquilized bear will get in this net, flown about 100 kilometers north or west, depending, and then they set the bear down gently. Imagine the pilot skills needed for that. They wake up. This is the key part. How much medicine do you give a bear so that it's safe, it doesn't get too cold, all these kinds of things, and you can still have enough time to fly it, let it out of that net, and be safe yourself. The cubs, you can see that back seat of that helicopter in this photo. The cubs go in the back seat, and they, of course, you want to give them less medicine. So can you imagine sitting in the back seat of a helicopter with a polar bear cub? That'd be pretty phenomenal. Hopefully, by the time the polar bears walk back to town, the ice will have formed. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes you will have a repeat offender. And one year, and I'm sure this has happened more than 1 year, but there's 1 year I know, in fact, there was a bear that they said, that's it. This bear is going to spend the whole season in the holding facility because he just keeps coming back to town, so he's staying. And he stayed until the ice was formed. The amazing thing is that once the ice is formed, they take the bears out to the ice and they just go. They know that they just want to go out. They don't head to town. They don't head back to jail. They just go right back out onto the ice. It's this instinct that drives them, and perhaps the smell of the seals. Meanwhile, while these bears are going through all these incredible experiences, we're out there trying to get a glimpse of them, and it's amazing in and of itself. Now, there's 19 different subpopulations of polar bears. These definitions are, of course, human definitions, and they're not necessarily drawn up in the best of ways. They are, in many ways, data deficient. You can see here, this is a map that the World Wildlife Fund has made. The light kind of gray color is where everything is data deficient. There's a lot of spots, right? Anything that's red is an area where the population is declining. And so if you see the Western Hudson Bay population, which is down in the center and a little to the left, is one of the populations that is declining. So we're keeping a close eye on them, and any opportunity to spend time with them is an absolute privilege. Hopefully we will have time for, of course, we have time for more webinars, and maybe sometime I can do one on the details of how populations are increasing and decreasing and whatnot, because getting into that detailed information and data is very interesting. So back to this year in the life of idea. As the summer months are ending, the bears are getting a sense that the ice is coming, the tourists are coming, and all around town there's these signs up, stop, don't walk in this area, and that's because the bears are going to be migrating. Now think about this. The Hudson Bay gets completely covered in ice, so all winter long it's ice. I shouldn't necessarily say completely covered. There are things called leads and polynyas, and these are openings in the ice, but these are not huge openings. Basically, think about it as being ice covered. When that ice starts to break up, which used to be in July, but is now more like June, the bears come onto shore. They come onto shore wherever they are. So this is the map of the bay frozen. About in the center of the map on the left-hand side is Churchill. Remember, it's that piece of land that is jetting out. I'm not sure if I move my, let's see, I think I can, yeah, I think you can see that. You can see my mouse moving there. That's the Churchill area. So if you can see my mouse, I hope you can see the way the currents in the bay move, they move counterclockwise. There's winds that come down from the north and the west, cold Arctic winds. So we've got winds coming down like this, we have currents going counterclockwise, and we have this piece of land that jets out over here. We also have enormous amounts of fresh water from all of the watershed from Canada, and that's also a webinar in and of itself, that is all moving towards Churchill. The combination of those things, fresh water, which freezes before salt water, the northwest wind coming down, the counterclockwise currents, all of that makes it so that the Churchill area freezes first. And the bears know this. They know, even if they ended up on land up here, or they ended up on land down here, they know that they are going to want to make their way towards Churchill because it's going to be the first place that freezes. So throughout the summer months, they're going to walk slowly towards the Churchill area. And I mean slowly, because these bears built up all their fat. They eat approximately 1 seal per week. Now, when I say that, I mean for the 52 weeks. And of course, they have to get that 1 seal per 52 weeks in during the summer months or the winter months. So they have to build up 2-3 seals per week in order to build up the fat they need to sustain them through those many months of no food, or basically no food. They'll munch on blueberries, they'll eat some of those eggs, but that's not the fat they need to be the bears that they are. They start walking towards Churchill. Around September, the females are going to split off. They're going to head towards those dens and start doing what they got to do. The males, the subadults, maybe females who had cubs last year and are not going to be able to have cubs this year, are going to stay in the Churchill area. Only pregnant females head towards the dens. The rest are hanging out in this waiting room with us, hopefully, when we get to be there, waiting for that ice to form. And usually, right around now, you can see their noses turn towards the bay. You can feel the crisp air come in. You can see the water start to look like jello, like a blue, clear jello. And then you can see it start to form pancake ice. And then there will be a storm, a very big storm. The ice will come in, and there we go. We have bears gone, and the year in the life of the polar bears is complete. And I cannot tell you how much I miss Churchill. It is the place where I belong this time of year. So I want to thank you all so very much for joining me today. It's an absolute pleasure to be back here with you. And I will now open it up to Kendall for questions. And I can't wait to hear from you guys.
Thank you, Annie. That was so fun. We do have a lot of good questions for you. And first, I'd just like to remind folks watching, if you have a question for Annie, you can submit those in the control panel under the questions field. Okay, Annie, there's some curiosity about Churchill itself.
Sure.
So we'll start out with a couple questions about that. Since it's in polar bear country, why and when did people settle there? Why was the town built there?
That is an excellent question. So Churchill has been around for thousands and thousands of years, first of all. Pre-Dorset culture, like I think it was 7,000 years ago. Lorraine at the museum is gonna kill me for getting these dates wrong, but long time of pre-colonization life in the Churchill area. Then when Europeans started to be interested in the area, it was because of the fur trade. So we had really, in many ways, you could say the beginning of Canada started there. Hudson Bay Company, which is the oldest corporation in North America, started there, and they were trading, especially with beaver, because of the top hat, and that was an excellent place. Because of that port, they could bring things quickly over to Europe, and of course, there was a huge amount of beavers that were available in Canada, and they were able to set up a huge trading route with the different groups that were there in the area. So hundreds of years for Europe to be settled there, and thousands and thousands of years for the First Nation groups.
Great. And what was Churchill like 20 years ago when you first started going?
It's a great question. Not that different in some ways. There was no cell phones, of course. There was no internet. So that was a difference. You really did feel quite disconnected when you went up there. when I would call my husband when we first started dating, he stayed in a cabin sometimes out at Goose Creek, which is sort of a cottage community. And it was a cabin, some of you remember that. I mean, my mom talks about this from when she was growing up in Western Springs outside of Chicago, that she would have like a party line, right? Like 4 or 5 houses that would share the same phone. And that's what it was like calling Joe. I would call Rick's cabin and say, is Joe around? And he would say, oh, I don't know, let me go find him. And we would plan for me to call back an hour later, and then I would get to talk with him. So there was like, one cabin for several different phones. In many ways though, you could walk into, this is a good one to tell you about it. You could walk into the grocery store with fur and come out with groceries. So that felt very like going back in time. And really today you can't do that because a corporation has bought the grocery store, but you can go to a place where you can sell your furs in town and then go to the grocery store. So the fur trade is still alive and active in the town of Churchill. So yeah, it really did feel like you're going back in time. In many ways, it still feels that way. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody helps everybody. Definitely that small town northern feel, which I also have to say, I feel that very much so living here in Alaska as well. There's one major difference though between here in Alaska and there in Canada, and that's the crown land. So with crown land, and my husband says this all the time, like, what do you still miss about Churchill? You can just go. As soon as you get right outside of the town of Churchill, you're on crown land and you can just go travel on that land. And that's really different, of course, than the way we sort of divide up land in America.
Great. And when did grains start shipping from Churchill? Is that the big business there now?
Not necessarily the big business there now. Tourism is the big business there now. Well, until this year. It was 1924 that the railway came to, gosh, suddenly I wonder if it's 29. Forgive me. That's the first time I've gotten that date, questioned that date. In the 20s, the rail came to Churchill. And with that, the port was able to open up. So that was the beginning of grain moving through there. The railway closed a few years ago because of that huge storm that happened. And then it opened up last year or the year before. And it is slowly coming back with that opening up. And so now there's ships that are coming back through there. But there's a lot of politics involved in where grain goes, which port grain goes through. And so there was a combination that really hurt the town of Churchill. It was the loss of the rail, but also there was a wheat board decision, and that gets into some really complicated stuff that has to do with whether the wheat goes through Churchill or goes all the way over to Vancouver. So that's, if someone's interested in that, those are the key words you want to go look into, is the wheat board, to understand how that all works.
Speaking of the train, do Nat Hab groups ever take the train up to Churchill?
We used to, and it was a real joy. We used to for our Northern Lights trips, and we used to for our beluga trips. Unfortunately, with climate change, we have just felt that it is not a safe means of travel at this point in time for our guests. There have been quite a few derailments in the recent years, and we said we're not willing, until that is solved and there are not frequent derailments, we're not willing to endanger our travelers. So unfortunately, we do not do that. But I'll tell you what, when they figure out how to have that be safe again, I will be one of the first people on that trip, because it is magical.
So speaking about bears a little bit more, we're going to transition into the bears themselves. Have you noticed a decline in number of polar bears in the last 20 years? And how many bears can you typically expect to see if you'd go up and visit now?
I have 100% noticed a decline. And I would say one of the biggest ways that I would describe that is, first, it used to be normal for us to see triplets. So that I didn't know when I first started guiding. You guys, I was like 24 when I first started guiding. And I had no idea how privileged I was, of course. I mean, I was grateful and I knew I had an amazing job, but we were teaching climate change, but I was 24 years old. Like now I look back and I think I had no idea how privileged I was to be seeing triplets on a regular basis. That was an incredible experience, and one that I just wish I could experience again, but we no longer see triplets with this population. That was a unique thing with the Hudson Bay population because they had a lot of food, and we just don't see it. I haven't seen it probably since 2003, I would think would be the last time that I saw that. We still see bears, of course. We wouldn't be running trips up there if we didn't. We're not that kind of company. But I guess I would say what has changed, I used to be able to say to people, when you come this week, you might see this. When you come this week, you might see this. Like it was very, I wouldn't say, you never say clockwork with nature, but it was just more predictable. And now I don't know what we're going to see. We've changed how we operate a little bit because of that. And we've made really great changes, but it's just a different world. It's heartbreaking to see. Like no one should be able to see in 20 years, right? That's a blip. But you do see a difference. At the same time, we see tons of bears. So it just goes to show, I think, like how many there were, and we still see a lot. So it's not that they're not there, it's that it was just there were so many in the past. Is that a good way to say that?
Yeah. So how many miles approximately do polar bears travel out on the ice and back in Churchill?
So this is crazy, and I would highly recommend looking up some of the bear tags. This is really something that I would, if you're a bear nerd at all, I would watch this over the next few years. So if you've ever seen bears with collars on them, they're so heavy. I bring these bear collars sometimes to classrooms, and one of the times when I brought them, my daughter was like in first grade, and they can barely pick them up. They're so heavy. Those collars only go on female bears. I'll give you just like a few seconds to think about why. Why would they only go on female bears? And also I want you to think for a second, how awful is our data if all the collecting we've been doing is only from females? The reason that it goes on female bears, let me see what photo I have back in here a second to see. Okay, so this is a female, and you kind of barely see it with this one, but a female bear, their head is more, this is the perfect one to see it. This is a female, and you can see that her head is quite round, right? A male bear has that very classic straight head, and their neck is often fatter than their head. So a collar just slips off. It just slides right off. It can't stay on for research. For a female, because their neck is going to be a little bit smaller and they have this nice round head, the collar will stay on. So a lot of the times when you're watching bears and out on the ice, you can look at World Wildlife Fund, or I think a couple different PBI might have one. You can watch these bears zigzagging on the ice. Those are almost always females. they stay quite close when they're females. There's a little bit of data. It's very new. Andrew DeRoche is doing the research. They have a transmitting tag that can go into the ear, I believe. Don't quote me on the location. It only stays on for a few months. It can't stay on for a long time. So that's one of the kind of struggles they've been dealing with this research and having good transmission. But it turns out the males go way farther, and it completely changes our picture. Like one male they saw going super far up past Baffin and way into the North Arctic. The females are going to stay pretty close, probably because they don't want to waste all that caloric energy that they're going to need for raising those young ones. But the males are going to explore. That's also going to keep genetic diversity within the population. So cool stuff on that area.
Yeah, that's super cool. So since you're speaking about the females, we've got a few questions about mothers and cubs. What is the gestation period for a female polar bear?
It's so weird. Okay, so it's delayed implantation, which quite a few animals have this. So mating happens in like the March time period, which lines up perfectly with when the seals are going to be giving birth to their pups. So the seals give birth, they've got these little butter balls that are stuck out on the ice, the perfect food for the moms who are starving. They're going to come out of their den in like March, right? And they're going to head out onto the ice, and here they have this really easy food source. That's also when the males are going to be ready to mate. But wait a minute, that's confusing because we talked about how they're going to give birth way down the line. Now, if you look at an animal that size, a mammal, you might think, no, that makes sense. That's like a 9-month gestation. It's a 60-day gestation. It's delayed. So what's going to happen is they're going to mate around that time, March, April. How do you find the females? Where the food is, right? So they're going to mate around that time. And then once the mating happens, the cells are only going to divide a few times, actually 6 times. When it gets to the blastocyst, it's going to like freeze. It's going to pause. And it's not going to implant into the uterine lining. It's literally just going to be like suspended. Then she's going to have a little bit more time out on the ice to gain weight. If she gains a certain amount of weight, then there will be a hormonal signal and the blastocyst will implant and the pregnancy will continue. It still won't continue to the point where she's going to like, that's not going to happen until later in the fall. It's not going to happen like right then when she's eating the seal. So that implantation will happen way later in that September. If it's 60 days and she gives birth, let's say January 1, the implantation would then happen November 1. So 60-day gestation, she gives birth January 1, and essentially she is giving birth, as I mentioned, to a premature baby. It's almost like she's going to create a external womb. So skinless, hairless. There's technically hair because we've got a mammal here, but really very, very little hair. The cub is a pound, and she's creating this womb so that she can stop using her muscle mass and just use her fat. So she's going to be nursing this young one and essentially continuing the pregnancy in an external womb in the den. So very, very unique. There's like raccoons have delayed implantation and a few other animals, but very cool. Very, very cool.
That's amazing. That's really amazing.
It's so cool.
So when the mothers and babies leave their dens, if the ice is melting by then, where do they find food?
The ice is not melting when they leave their dens because that's March. So they're going to leave their dens in March. Perfect timing for them to go. The seals are having their pups on the ice. So it's like the perfect confluence of the best available food source. When the ice forms in November, there's not that much to eat. That's not actually the best time. They're going to go get seals when the ice forms, but it's not their highest caloric intake. March, when the seal pups are there, the polar bears, young, old, and everywhere in between, that's when they're going to get a ton of their calories. It's hard for us to think about that because we have to eat like, I don't know, 6 meals a day or whatever it is, right? Like we keep snacking throughout the day. So we're not to think about getting your calories in it like one time a year is just almost impossible for us to imagine. But they're built so that a huge part of their caloric intake happens March, April, June. And this is an interesting part. My friend Bonnie, who grew up, some of you maybe had Bonnie as a guide. She's just fantastic. She grew up in Churchill and she talks about going out on the land, that capital L land. She talks about doing that when she was little and that, of course, they would carry a gun for safety when they would go out on the land. And they needed that gun in July, late July, when she was little, because the ice would break up and the bears would head out onto the land, right? Now they need it in early June. And to me, that really struck, for some reason, that just made it very real to me. I think that we have that here where we know, like, okay, the bears are out of their den. You don't go for a run the same way in, say, October when the bears are hungry and they haven't denned up yet. You don't go for a run the same way in the forest then. You don't go for a run the same way in the forest in, say, March here when the bears are coming out of their den. There's a keen awareness you have when you live somewhere where bears are on the land. And so the fact that the polar bears are on the land for Churchillians to deal with 4 to 6 weeks earlier, that's 4 to 6 weeks less availability of the easiest food source, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. How old are the cubs when they go off on their own?
So that is another amazing, you guys have the best questions. I'm so proud of this audience. That's a really amazing adaptation. So think about these mothers in Churchill. First of all, they used to have 3 cubs and now they don't. Smart move, right? With less resources, decrease the number of cubs. And they used to be known for keeping their cubs for 1.5 years. And now they keep them for more like 2.5 to 3 years, which is more like the high Arctic polar bears. So also smart move, keep them for longer, make sure that they're going to succeed. Also make sure that you're not going to have to go have another round of cubs in that amount of time. Good for making sure that they succeed, not good for the population because that's a whole set of cubs that isn't born, right?
Mm-hmm.
But good because that one is more likely to succeed.
Right, right. Okay, so someone watching says, so they understand that the loss of ice due to climate change is reducing polar bears' food source and timing. So is that also impacting their breeding patterns or just reducing those that are fit enough to breed?
It's a great question. I guess it would be both because, as I just mentioned, those females that would have perhaps been available to breed again would be keeping their cubs for longer. So that would be affecting a breeding pattern. So that would be a breeding pattern there. In general, yeah, that would be the breeding pattern that it would be affecting. But in general, it's food availability and fitness for cubs. That is the issue.
All right. So on to a couple general questions about traveling to Churchill. I'm going to combine them all.
Yeah.
Is there a time when you can see bears in Aurora? And on summer trips, do you ever see bears, or is it just too early?
So this a little bit goes back to that question about, you know, what has changed in the last 20 years. When I guided belugas 18 whatever years ago, I would not have really said like that you could see bears. I mean, maybe, right? But I wouldn't have ever sort of said, oh, you have a pretty good chance. I wouldn't have said it. Now, if someone said to me, I think I'm only going to get to go to Churchill once in my life, when should I go? I would say summer. I would say late summer, because there is a decent chance that you would see a polar bear. I would never promise it. I don't dare promise very much at all in wildlife, but there is a much more decent chance than there used to be. Belugas are the most underappreciated animal ever. That trip is phenomenal. And in late August, it gets dark enough that there's a chance that you could see aurora. It's a low chance because it's fall, the bay is going to be making ice, and you're going to have clouds, but it could happen. So if you were ever going to get a trifecta, that's when it could happen. The question about bears and lights, technically speaking, we every once in a while do get the incredible pleasure of seeing bears and northern lights on our polar bear trips. But I never promise that, because as I've mentioned, the bay is making ice and you just don't, it's cloudy that time of year. It's like going to a rainforest and hoping for a sunny afternoon. It happens, but it's not expected.
All right.
And
great.
man, I hope you don't see bears during northern light season, because that is all hope that doesn't happen.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Annie. This has been such a treat, and it's wonderful to have you back presenting with us again. It's almost the top of the hour, so I'm going to hand it back over to you for closing comments.
You bet. Kendall, it's so good to be back. I missed all of you, even though I don't get to see your faces. It is so fun to get to share these things with you, and I felt a little bit like I was back in Churchill today, just to get to share this place and my love for it with you. So hopefully we'll talk about it again soon, and send in your notes. Where do you want to go next, guys? Let us know, because we get to vicariously travel through these webinars. So thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, it's an absolute pleasure. Kendall, thanks for your help.
Yeah, thanks again, Annie, and my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, guys. Don't miss tomorrow.